She was killed in Afghanistan, buried with honors, end of story. Until this morning, when she walked into Fort Bragg's most elite sniper program, with a classified file and a stare that made colonels flinch. Nobody knew her name, but every killer in that room felt the chill. One whispered, "She's not supposed to be alive." The others? They laughed, until she asked for a broken rifle, and aimed for a ghost target 2 miles away. The United States Army Sniper Training Center at Fort Bragg existed in its own universe of lethal precision. Every surface gleamed with military perfection, from the polished brass casings displayed in trophy cases to the spotless concrete floors that reflected fluorescent lights. This wasn't just a shooting range. This was where the Army transformed its best marksmen into instruments of death. The air tasted of gun oil and testosterone, heavy with the weight of tradition that stretched back through every American conflict. Sarah Chen stood at the registration desk like a tourist who'd wandered into the wrong building. Her paperwork sat in front of the clerk, who kept glancing between her face and whatever was written on those pages. The registration form listed her as a CIA analyst cross-training for field operations, not uncommon since Langley had started embedding more operators with Special Forces units. Her sponsor signature came from a redacted intelligence officer, the kind of authorization that made questions disappear. Around them, the morning routine continued. Instructors barked commands. Trainees cleaned weapons with religious devotion. The competitive atmosphere pressed down like atmospheric pressure before a storm. Everyone here had earned their place through blood, sweat, and perfect trigger control. The statistics spoke louder than words. 3% female participation in the entire sniper program, most washed out within 48 hours. The ones who stayed faced a different kind of war, fighting not just to meet standards but to justify their presence in this brotherhood of long-distance death. The jokes started before she'd even finished signing her name. Something about Daddy's little princess playing with the big boys. Something about how the recoil would probably knock her on her ass. She absorbed it all without reaction, her pen moving across forms with mechanical precision. But there was something about the way she held the pen, not like someone who pushed papers, but with the same grip used to steady a rifle. The clerk's face had gone pale now, his eyes fixed on a section of her paperwork marked with red stamps. Classified, restricted, need to know. Words that didn't belong on a beginner's application. He fumbled with her registration packet, nearly dropping it twice. Other staff members began to notice. A senior instructor drifted over, casual but alert, the way predators moved when they sensed something unusual in their territory. "Ma'am, you sure you're in the right building?" The instructor's voice carried that particular tone reserved for lost civilians. "This isn't the standard marksmanship course. This is advanced sniper training." She looked up then, and something in her eyes made him step back half a pace. Not aggression, not challenge, just a depth of experience that didn't match her appearance. Her voice came out soft, almost apologetic, but with a slight rasp that spoke of desert dust and screamed commands. "I'm exactly where I need to be. 6 months of hiding wasn't enough to forget why I'm here." The equipment she carried told its own contradictory story. The duffel bag looked like military surplus from a decade ago, but the rifle case bore specifications that made the instructor's eyebrows rise. Vintage exterior, but the weight distribution suggested modern modifications. Her hands showed the telltale calluses of 1,000 hours on the trigger, but her overall appearance screamed civilian. Nothing added up. When she shifted the rifle case, her left shoulder rolled with an unconscious adjustment, the kind of movement that came from compensating for an old injury. In the background, the morning's first shots cracked across the 1,000-yard range. Each trainee here represented their unit's best. Special Forces, Rangers, Marines who'd earned their badges in blood. They moved through the facility with earned arrogance, secure in their place at the top of the military food chain. They barely glanced at the small woman filling out paperwork. If they had looked closer, they might have noticed how she unconsciously tracked every sound, how her positioning gave her clear sightlines to all exits, how she held herself with the perfect balance of someone always ready to move. The instructor handed back her paperwork, his hand trembling slightly. Whatever he'd seen in her file had shifted something fundamental in his worldview. Behind them, whispers began to spread through the registration area. Someone had recognized something. A technique, a stance, a ghost of memory from classified operations they weren't supposed to discuss. She shouldered her rifle case and walked toward the equipment lockers, leaving behind a wake of uncertain silence. As she passed, one of the senior trainees caught a glimpse of her left shoulder blade where her shirt had shifted, the hint of a tattoo, or maybe a scar, something that made him grab his buddy's arm and whisper urgently. "Check her left shoulder blade," he hissed. "Is that what I think it is?" "Can't be," his friend replied. "She had darker hair, and she was taller, wasn't she? Besides, Ghost Rodriguez died in Kandahar. Everyone knows that." Colonel Marcus Steele had served 15 years as Fort Bragg's senior sniper instructor, 45 years old, built like a linebacker, with a face carved from granite and prejudices just as hard. He'd trained the best killers in the American military, and he'd done it by breaking down every candidate until only the worthy remained. When he saw the blonde woman enter his classroom, his expression shifted from annoyance to outright disgust. This was his domain, and political correctness had no place here. "Well, well," Steele's voice boomed across the classroom, stopping conversations mid-sentence. "Looks like someone got lost on their way to the secretarial pool." The woman's micro-flinch wasn't at the insult, it was at the word lost. For just a moment, her 1,000-yard stare surfaced, the look of someone who'd been lost behind enemy lines and found their way back through willpower alone. Major Rebecca Hartwell watched from the corner, her psychological warfare insignia gleaming on her collar. 38 years old, brilliant, and convinced that women compromised unit cohesion. She didn't need to raise her voice like Steele. Her methods were more subtle, more devastating. She'd already begun documenting the new arrivals' every move, looking for weaknesses to exploit. In her experience, female soldiers cracked under the right pressure. It was just a matter of finding the correct point of leverage. The equipment malfunction started immediately. Steele assigned Rodriguez the worst rifle in inventory, a weapon that hadn't been properly maintained in months. The scope was misaligned, the trigger mechanism damaged, the barrel showing signs of wear that would affect accuracy at any real distance. Standard ammunition was somehow unavailable for her, leaving only rejected rounds with inconsistent powder loads. Her targets were set at maximum range while other trainees worked standard distances. "Equipment problems already?" Steele's voice dripped condescension when she examined the rifle. "Maybe this is too much for you to handle, sweetheart. No shame in admitting you're not cut out for a man's job." She absorbed the insult without reaction, her breathing steady as she field-stripped the weapon to assess the damage. Her hands moved with unconscious expertise, identifying each flaw with the precision of someone who'd maintained weapons in combat conditions. Around her, other trainees snickered at Steele's comments. The pecking order was clear. She was at the bottom, and they were happy to keep her there. But one trainee, Corporal Davies, watched her hands work and felt a chill. He'd seen those exact movements before, in classified footage from Afghanistan. The way she checked the firing pin, the specific pattern of her inspection, it was textbook Ghost Rodriguez technique. But that was impossible. Rodriguez was dead. He'd attended the memorial service himself. Have you ever been underestimated because of how you look? What would you do to prove them wrong? Hartwell's campaign operated on a different level. She orchestrated accidents with surgical precision. Rodriguez's gear went missing from her locker. Her meal tray was knocked from her hands in the cafeteria. Training schedules were changed without notification, leaving her scrambling to arrive on time. Each incident appeared random, unconnected, but the psychological pressure accumulated like interest on a bad debt. Through it all, Rodriguez maintained an almost supernatural calm. She doubled her training hours, arriving before dawn to practice with the defective equipment. She studied ballistics manuals by flashlight after lights out. When her food was contaminated, she went hungry. When her gear disappeared, she improvised. The other trainees began to notice her dedication, though most dismissed it as desperation. But there was one moment, just one, where the facade cracked. Late one night, alone in the empty barracks bathroom, she gripped the sink until her knuckles went white. In the mirror, Sarah Chen's face wavered, and Elena Rodriguez stared back. 6 months of being someone else. 6 months of pretending her team wasn't dead. The sob that escaped was quickly stifled, but tears ran silently down her cheeks as she whispered their names like a prayer. Williams, Martinez, Thompson. By morning, the mask was back in place, but the red-rimmed eyes told their own story to anyone who looked closely enough. "Keep breathing, Rodriguez," she whispered to herself during a particularly brutal morning session, then caught herself. "Chen, keep breathing, Chen." The memory surfaced unbidden. Kandahar, the smell of dust and cordite, Sergeant Williams laughing as he cleaned his rifle. "Ghost, you've got ice water in your veins." If only he could see her now, taking abuse from weekend warriors who'd never seen real combat. But they couldn't know. Not yet. Steele's suspicion grew with each passing day. Her shooting stance was too perfect, learned through muscle memory rather than training manuals. She calculated wind drift without instruments, reading air currents like a native language. During a classroom session on ballistics, she quietly corrected an equation on her paper that even Steele had missed. These weren't the skills of a beginner. He'd started running her photos through facial recognition, but something was off. The bone structure was right, but the hair color, the subtle differences in features. Whoever had crafted this identity knew how to fool automated systems. "Your background check came back interesting," Steele cornered her after a training session. "Lots of classified stamps, lots of redacted information. You want to tell me who you really are, and why someone with your apparent experience is taking basic sniper training?" "I'm nobody special, sir." Her voice remained neutral, respectful, though something flickered behind her eyes. "Just here to refresh my skills. Been out of the field for 6 months. Doctor's orders after an injury. Need to recertify before returning to active duty." The lie came smoothly, but Steele wasn't buying it. Nobody with her skill level needed basic training to recertify, but the cracks in her cover were showing. During a night navigation exercise, she moved through darkness with the confidence of someone who'd hunted human targets by starlight. Her breathing patterns under stress matched combat conditioning, not civilian habits. When a trainer mentioned specific military operations in Afghanistan, her micro-expressions revealed recognition she couldn't quite hide. During one session, an instructor was discussing famous shots from military history. "The Ghost of Kandahar's last recorded shot was 2,847 meters in combat conditions," he said. Before she was KIA, of course. 2,852 meters, Chen said quietly, then caught herself. "I mean, that's what the report said, right?" The room went silent. That detail had never been publicly released. Hartwell documented everything in her psychological profile. The way Rodriguez's jaw tightened when they discussed failed missions. How her hands stilled completely when someone mentioned sniper teams lost in action. The 1,000-yard stare that appeared when helicopter rotors thundered overhead. This woman carried ghosts, and Hartwell intended to use them. The sabotage escalated. During a critical qualification round, Rodriguez's rifle jammed at the worst possible moment. The malfunction was deliberate, obvious to anyone who understood weapons. But instead of complaining, she cleared the jam with movements so fast several instructors stepped forward to watch. She completed the qualification with a weapon that should have been non-functional. "I've seen that technique before," one instructor murmured to another. "But where?" "Afghanistan," the other replied quietly. "Kandahar province. But the sniper who used that technique..." He didn't finish the sentence. The announcement echoed across the range like a challenge thrown down by the gods themselves. 2-mile precision shot competition. Extreme weather conditions with crosswinds gusting at 15 miles per hour. The target was a standard enemy sniper silhouette, barely visible to the naked eye at that distance. For most marksmen, hitting anything at 2 miles required perfect equipment, ideal conditions, and a healthy dose of luck. For someone with a sabotaged rifle, it was mathematically impossible. "Absolutely not." Steele's rejection came swift and harsh when Rodriguez volunteered. "This is an advanced exercise for experienced operators, not beginners who can barely handle standard qualifications." Hartwell added her voice to the dismissal, her tone dripping with false concern. "We have liability issues to consider. When she fails spectacularly, and she will, it reflects poorly on the entire program. Some people simply aren't built for this level of performance." The other trainees gathered around, sensing blood in the water. Their comments ranged from mockingly sympathetic to openly hostile. She'd embarrass herself. She'd embarrass the program. Hell, she'd probably embarrass the entire concept of women in combat roles. The smart money said she'd miss the target entirely, assuming she could even see it at that range. Rodriguez stood her ground with quiet determination. "I understand the risks, sir. I accept full responsibility for any failure." "Request denied." Steele turned away, dismissing her with the gesture. "Unless," her voice stopped him mid-stride, "you're admitting your equipment is inadequate for training purposes. I'm sure that would make an interesting report." The challenge hung in the air like cordite after a shot. Steele's face darkened. recognizing the trap. If he continued refusing, he admitted to providing faulty equipment. If he allowed it, he set her up for humiliation. Either way, she'd forced his hand. Around them, trainees exchanged glances. Nobody talked to Colonel Steele that way. Nobody. Fine. Steele's smile was all teeth and no warmth. You want to embarrass yourself in front of everyone? Be my guest. But when you fail, you're done here. Understood? What would you do if someone gave you broken tools but expected perfect results? The preparation phase revealed more of her hidden expertise. She examined the rifle with the thoroughness of a master armorer, identifying each deliberate flaw. The scope was misaligned by several minutes of angle. The trigger mechanism had been adjusted to an inconsistent breakpoint. Even the ammunition showed signs of tampering, with powder loads varying between rounds. Any single issue would destroy accuracy at extreme range. Together, they made success impossible for anyone except someone who understood precision shooting at a molecular level. She began her calculations on a notepad, factoring in wind speed, humidity, barometric pressure, the Coriolis effect, and spin drift. Other shooters watched in confusion as she drew complex mathematical formulas that looked more like physics equations than shooting solutions. One equation made Davies's blood run cold. He'd seen it before, in a classified after-action report. It was Ghost Rodriguez's signature calculation for extreme-range shooting in Afghan mountain conditions. She selected each round by weight, grouping them by microscopic variations only she could detect. Her preparations took over an hour while others grew impatient. "Sometime today, Princess," someone called out. "The target's not getting any closer." Rodriguez moved to the firing line with deliberate calm. The memory crashed over her uninvited. Operation Nightfall, the smell of cordite mixing with blood. Williams screaming over comms as their position was compromised. Mason's voice, steady as ice, feeding them coordinates that led straight into an ambush. She should have known then, the way he'd smiled when he'd volunteered to confirm their deaths, except hers. She settled into her shooting position with a fluidity that made several instructors step forward. The damaged rifle became an extension of her body despite its flaws. Her breathing slowed to almost nothing, heartbeat dropping to combat levels. Around her, the crowd grew quiet, sensing something beyond their understanding was about to happen. The first shot cracked across the range. Through scopes and binoculars, observers tracked its flight. The impact came 3 seconds later, missing the target by inches. The crowd erupted in predicted mockery. Steele's satisfaction was obvious. Hartwell made notes about accepting limitations. But Rodriguez remained in position, processing the data from that missed shot. "Told you," someone laughed. 2 miles with broken equipment? She's delusional." Without acknowledging the comments, Rodriguez made minute adjustments. Not to the scope, which she'd already written off as useless, but to her position. She was calculating the mechanical offset caused by the equipment failures, using that missed shot as a data point. Other shooters recognized the technique but couldn't believe someone would attempt it at this range. "Is she—" an instructor started to ask, then stopped. "No, that's impossible." Rodriguez had transitioned to iron sights, at 2 miles, in 15-mile-per-hour crosswinds, with ammunition that varied in performance. The physics alone suggested insanity. But her position was perfect, her breathing mechanical, her trigger finger resting with the patience of a hunter who'd waited days for one perfect shot. The range fell silent except for wind indicators snapping in the breeze. The second shot shattered the morning air. Time stretched as everyone tracked the bullet's path. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds of absolute silence. The impact was perfect. Center mass on the enemy sniper silhouette, at 2 miles, with iron sights, using sabotaged equipment. The range erupted, not in celebration, but in stunned disbelief. Instructors grabbed binoculars to confirm what couldn't be real. Trainees stood frozen, trying to process what they'd witnessed. Steele's face had gone pale, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Hartwell's pen had stopped moving mid-word. "Only one person shoots like that," a visiting instructor whispered, his voice carrying in the shocked silence. "But she's dead, killed in action 6 months ago in Afghanistan." Davies stepped forward, his voice shaking. "I know who you are. I've known for 3 days, but I didn't want to believe it. The way you strip a rifle, that equation you use for wind drift, the scar on your shoulder from Kandahar." He swallowed hard. "You're not Sarah Chen." The small twist hung in the air as Rodriguez slowly stood, her disguise meaningless now. The blonde hair dye, the subtle facial prosthetics that had fooled the cameras, the practiced mannerisms of a CIA analyst. None of it mattered anymore. The ghost of Kandahar had just announced her resurrection with a shot that defied physics. The Rangemaster's tablet illuminated with classified files as he input her biometric data. His face drained of color with each line of text that appeared on the screen. Around him, the crowd remained frozen in disbelief, their world fundamentally altered by what they'd just witnessed. 2 miles, iron sights, sabotaged equipment. The physics didn't just suggest difficulty, they screamed impossibility. "Sir," the Rangemaster's voice cracked as he pulled Steele aside. "Her real name is Sergeant Elena Ghost Rodriguez, Medal of Honor recipient, 47 confirmed kills in Afghanistan, Silver Star, Bronze Star, Purple Heart." He paused, swallowing hard. "Officially killed in action 6 months ago during Operation Nightfall. The woman who registered as Sarah Chen. She's been using a CIA-provided cover identity." Steele stared at the woman calmly cleaning her rifle, his entire worldview crumbling. "Then who the hell have we been training?" "A ghost who needed to stay dead long enough to catch her killer," Rodriguez said without looking up. "Sarah Chen was a necessary fiction, a Chinese-American analyst who died in a car accident 6 months ago, right around the time I supposedly died in Afghanistan. The CIA needed me invisible while they tracked Mason's network, but when we learned he was coming here," she finally met their eyes, "I needed to be where he couldn't ignore me." The truth emerged in fragments, each piece more damning than the last. Operation Nightfall had been a classified Delta Force mission to eliminate a high-value Taliban commander in the mountains outside Kandahar. 4 elite snipers had inserted under cover of darkness. Only one had been meant to survive, and she wasn't it. The betrayal had been surgical, precise, orchestrated by someone with intimate knowledge of their protocols and positions. Captain Derek Mason. The name tasted like poison in Rodriguez's mouth as she methodically cleaned the rifle that had tried to betray her just as he had. Former Fort Bragg instructor, trained in this very facility 3 years prior, now selling his expertise to the highest bidder. $2 million had been the price for her team's lives. $2 million paid by enemies who wanted American blood and got it wholesale. Rodriguez set down her cleaning rod and finally met Steele's eyes. "Mason didn't just sell our position. He provided our extraction routes, our communication protocols, our ammunition specifications. My team trusted him because he'd trained here, because he wore the same uniform, because he'd earned the same tabs." The cover-up had been masterful in its simplicity. During the ambush, Mason had timed explosives to destroy any evidence of the betrayal. A local Afghan woman's body, similar in height and build, had been designated as Rodriguez's remains. Dr. Sarah Vance, Mason's romantic partner embedded with the medical unit, had falsified the death certificates without conducting proper DNA analysis. The surveillance footage from the operation had mysteriously corrupted. The Afghan interpreter who'd guided them had vanished with a suspicious payment in his account. 72 hours, Rodriguez continued, her voice steady despite the memories threatening to surface. "That's how long I spent evading Taliban patrols with shrapnel in my shoulder and a concussion that made the world spin. When I finally reached a CIA safe house, I had a choice. Come back officially and let Mason know he'd failed, or stay dead and find out how deep the rot went. If you discovered who betrayed your closest friends, would you choose justice or revenge?" The revelation shifted the atmosphere in the room from shock to horror. They'd been harboring a traitor's instructor, celebrating techniques that had been sold to enemy forces. How many other Masons had graduated from this program? How many other teams had been compromised by intel sold from within? "The International Sniper Competition," Rodriguez said, loading a fresh magazine with mechanical precision. "Mason's returning next week as an expert consultant. Public venue, international witnesses, media coverage. The perfect stage for justice or revenge, depending on your perspective." Hartwell found her voice first, professionalism overriding personal prejudice. "You're planning to assassinate him during the competition?" "Kill him?" Rodriguez's laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. "Death would be mercy. Mason needs to be exposed, his network revealed, his buyers identified. Every family who lost someone to his betrayal deserves to know why." The psychological weight of her revelations settled over the group like fog. She'd endured their harassment, their sabotage, their humiliation, all while carrying the knowledge that one of their own had murdered her team. The restraint required defied comprehension. Lesser soldiers would have snapped, would have sought violent resolution. Rodriguez had chosen the harder path of justice. "Every night I see their faces," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Williams, who kept photos of his daughters in his scope cover. Martinez, 2 weeks from retirement, planning to open a motorcycle shop. Thompson, 23 years old, engaged to his high school sweetheart. Good soldiers, better friends. They died believing in their country while their country's training produced their killer. Steele straightened to attention, offering a formal salute that Rodriguez didn't acknowledge. Around them, other instructors and trainees followed suit, recognizing they stood in the presence of something beyond their experience. A ghost story made flesh. A legend they'd dismissed as propaganda. A warrior who'd chosen justice over vengeance despite having every reason to paint Fort Bragg's walls with Mason's blood. The encrypted message arrived on her phone with surgical timing. Rodriguez read it once, her expression never changing, then showed it to Steele. "Mason knows you're alive. He's bringing a team to eliminate you during the competition. You have 18 hours to decide, disappear forever, or face him in the most public venue possible. Either way, this ends tomorrow." She looked at her reflection in the rifle's polished receiver. The ghost of Kandahar stared back, neither alive nor dead, suspended between justice and revenge. Tomorrow, in front of the world's military elite, she would face the man who'd murdered her family in all but blood. The shot would be televised globally. The consequences would reshape military intelligence protocols forever. 18 hours, she repeated, shouldering the rifle that had failed to fail her. Just enough time to prepare for one last mission. The International Sniper Championship dawned crisp and clear, perfect conditions for long-range precision shooting. 50 elite marksmen from 20 nations had gathered at Fort Bragg's extended range, their rifles and reputations polished to lethal perfection. 10,000 spectators filled temporary grandstands while television cameras broadcast every shot to a global audience. Military contracts worth $500 million hung in the balance, but the real stakes were measured in blood and betrayal. Derek Mason arrived with the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. 6 private military contractors formed his security detail, men who'd sold their skills to the same bidders who'd purchased American deaths. Mason's cover as an expert commentator for the television broadcast gave him access to the media tower, 800 meters from the firing line with clear sight lines to every shooting position. The rifle case his team carried contained more than camera equipment. Rodriguez had entered under her real name, a resurrection that rippled through military channels like a stone dropped in still water. She wore standard military fatigues now, her movements precise and economical as she prepared her equipment. Steele and Hartwell's teams had positioned themselves throughout the venue, providing overwatch for the confrontation everyone knew was coming. The question wasn't whether Mason would attempt to kill her, but when. The competition began with standard protocol, 2,800-meter shots in moderate crosswind. Rodriguez's bullet flew true, painting the center of her target with mechanical precision. 3,000 meters with elevation changes. Another perfect hit that drew appreciative murmurs from military observers who understood the physics involved. 3,200 meters in extreme conditions, the shot that separated elite from legendary. Her bullet found its mark like it was guided by providence rather than skill. What would you risk everything to get justice for those who can't speak for themselves? Mason made his move as Rodriguez prepared for her final competition shot. From the media tower, his rifle emerged from a camera housing, the suppressor already aligned with her position. 800 meters wasn't a difficult shot for a trained sniper, especially against a stationary target focused on her own shooting. But Steele had spotted the telltale glint of glass where glass shouldn't be. His hand signal was subtle but sufficient. Rodriguez absorbed the warning without breaking position. The decision came in the space between heartbeats. Abandon the competition to survive, or trust in skills honed through 47 confirmed kills and countless hours of training. She processed variables faster than conscious thought. Wind speed, humidity, elevation, the angle needed to reach the media tower while maintaining her competition stance. One shot, 800 meters upward trajectory against a target preparing to fire, all while 50 television cameras captured every movement. "This is for Williams, for Martinez, for Thompson," she whispered, her words lost in the wind. "For every soldier who trusted their country and got a bullet for their faith." Her voice cracked slightly, pain bleeding through the professional veneer. "Mason, you should have made sure I was dead, because now the ghost of Kandahar has come home." The rifle spoke with lethal authority. Rodriguez's shot abandoned the competition target, arcing through space toward the media tower. Television cameras tracked the trajectory in confusion. Commentators scrambled for explanations. In the tower, Mason's finger was tightening on his trigger when Rodriguez's bullet found his shoulder, spinning him backward with surgical precision. His rifle tumbled from the window, clattering down 8 stories to shatter on concrete. The shot wasn't cold calculation. It was measured justice delivered through a haze of grief. Her hands trembled slightly as she worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing. The ghost of Kandahar wasn't an emotionless machine. She was a soldier carrying the weight of 3 good men, channeling her pain into precision. The shoulder shot was deliberate, designed to incapacitate without killing. Death would have been easier, cleaner, but her team deserved better than easy. Chaos erupted across the venue. Security personnel stormed the media tower. Cameras swiveled between Rodriguez's position and Mason's window. The crowd's confusion transformed to shock as Mason's assassination attempt became clear. His rifle, communication equipment, and detailed plans were discovered within minutes. Under interrogation amplified by live broadcast, the dam of his deceptions finally broke. Names spilled from Mason's lips like blood from a wound. Enemy contacts who'd purchased American positions, military personnel who'd facilitated intelligence transfers, bank accounts swollen with blood money. The network he'd cultivated reached into multiple agencies, a cancer of greed that had metastasized through America's defense infrastructure. Every confession was captured by cameras, broadcast to a global audience that included the families of soldiers who died from his betrayals. Rodriguez never moved from her shooting position. As security forces led Mason away, she returned to her competition stance with mechanical calm. But those watching closely could see her hands shake slightly as she loaded the final round. The weight of 6 months of deception, of carrying her team's memory alone, of choosing justice over the vengeance that would have been so much simpler, it all pressed down in this moment. The final target waited 3,200 meters distant. She calculated wind drift and bullet drop like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just exposed international corruption while defending herself from assassination. The crowd held its breath as she prepared for a shot that would either cement her legend or reveal her humanity. The bullet flew true, finding center mass with impossible precision, a perfect score under impossible circumstances. The crowd erupted in applause that felt more like prayer than celebration. Rodriguez safed her weapon and stood, finally allowing herself to survey the chaos her shot had created. Justice had been served with surgical precision, broadcast to the world in high definition. Mason would face trial. His network would be dismantled. The families of fallen soldiers would finally have answers. "Would you do it again?" Steele asked quietly as officials rushed to escort Rodriguez from the range. "Knowing everything it cost you?" She considered the question while packing her rifle with practiced efficiency. For a moment, the professional mask slipped completely. "Every soldier who puts on this uniform accepts that they might die for their country. They don't accept that their country might sell them out for money." Her voice caught. "My team deserved better. Every team deserves better. And if I have to carry this weight so other teams don't end up like mine, then yes, every time." What would you do if you had the skills to right every wrong, but the cost was never having a normal life again? The media descended like locusts, desperate for interviews with the ghost who'd returned from the dead to expose corruption at the highest levels. Military brass lined up to offer commendations, positions, whatever would associate them with her legend. Rodriguez walked through it all like smoke through light, present but untouchable. At the range exit, she paused to look back at the competition field one last time. "Where will you go?" Hartwell asked, professional respect evident in her tone. "Wherever ghosts are needed," Rodriguez replied, shouldering her rifle case. Mason wasn't unique. He was just the one who got caught. She vanished into the crowd before anyone could respond, leaving behind only questions and the echo of perfect shots. The television coverage continued for hours, analysts dissecting every moment of the confrontation. But Rodriguez had already disappeared, walking toward a horizon that promised neither peace nor rest, only purpose. 6 months later, international news reported the destruction of a mercenary compound in South America. Witnesses described impossible shots from impossible distances. No bodies were recovered from sniper positions. Local legends spoke of a ghost who hunted those who betrayed their brothers in arms. Military intelligence services noted the pattern but filed no official reports. Some stories were better left as whispers in the dark. At Fort Bragg, fresh flowers appeared daily at a memorial wall dedicated to fallen Special Operations soldiers. The cards were never signed, but everyone knew. The ghost of Kandahar had become something more than human. She'd become the consequence that waited in darkness for those who sold honor for silver. She'd become justice itself, precise and inescapable as a perfectly aimed shot. The rifle range stood empty at sunset, wind moving through grass with whispers of possibility. Somewhere in the world, betrayers checked their windows and wondered if today was the day their past caught up. Somewhere else, a woman cleaned her rifle and remembered 3 good soldiers who'd deserved better. The war between justice and revenge continued with each sunrise, measured in perfect shots and imperfect choices. The ghost endured. The legend grew. The mission never ended.